M. Night Shyamalan, good morning. How are you, my man?
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So, now this is, I have to be honest with you, this is unexpected. My producer goes, okay, we have M. Night Shyamalan. I go, okay. He said that you were coming on today. He told me this yesterday. I said, all right, he must have a new movie coming out, something. A book that closed the education gap. How did this come about?
You know, my wife and I have a foundation, and we do lots of different work, some internationally and some domestic, and that's been going on for a while, maybe 13 years. And I kind of focus more and more on education domestically. And, ultimately, the book that's out in the bookstores now is actually just about a kind of a novice learning everything that's been proven in education. And when I'm talking about the achievement gap that you referenced on the cover, we're talking about the learning achievement gap between inner city low-income kids and their white suburban counterparts, which is a real gap that exists and has always existed. And what if anything, been proven to close the gap? And actually, over 4.5 years, I went around the country and met a lot of people, and it was just out of curiosity, actually, to learn what the experts know and what the research has, and put it all in one place. And it was really exciting, actually, to see that there was an answer.
Do you and your wife have kids yourselves?
We do. We have 3 girls. One's 17, who's doing the whole college application thing, which is brutal.
And obviously you've earned a fortune, more money than most people will see in 100 lifetimes. What advantages do you think that your kids get out of that, as opposed to, I mean, some obvious things, of course, as opposed to inner city kids, but I mean, what is the big difference that people can do, or that can happen to close that gap, if you had to pick one or two things?
There's your question actually has two different parts to it, because there's a kind of a separate issue of how do you take, let's call it the equilibrium of the public schools in suburbia, and how to make them the very best that they could be. That's a whole different subject and has whole different research attached to it. And actually, I'm not too familiar with what would be those things that would help, raise a good school to unbelievable. But what we're talking about is taking what actually is holding the country back, which is the schools in the inner city. Which, if you took out the schools that are below the poverty line, over 90%, where most of the kids are going to poverty line, if you just took those schools out and you looked at all the rest of the schools in the United States, we actually have the best education system in the entire world.
Really? That's interesting.
It's a giant gap that exists, actually, that, we have 2 classes of citizens, the ones that live in the inner city and that are poor, and then the rest of us. And we all fall into a category on an equilibrium of good to great education. And so really the book's kind of focusing on this one group that's over here that's not getting the same opportunity in the United States that everybody else is.
Speaking of the United States, how you were born in India. How old were you before you moved to the United States?
Oh my gosh, my parents were living here before with my sister, and then they went back and had me in India, in Pondicherry, in India. So I came back after like 5-6 months.
So you didn't really grow up there. I mean,
no, not at all. As you can tell by my thick Philadelphia accent.
Well, I always hear these studies, and you probably know more about this because you've researched this, but I always hear studies in the news of other countries, places like India, where these kids, they really focus on science and math, computer science, and these kids, instead of going out and playing athletics and trying to have their kids excel in basketball or football like so many of us here do, that they really put an emphasis on learning. And
yeah.
I always wonder if that's true, or if that's just sort of hyped up to make us feel bad about what losers we are here in the United States.
Well, again, first of all, that's not really the subject of the book, which is about the inner city education in the United States. But I do have a thought on that, which is actually there's it's basically an immigrant culture, right? It's a kind of my parents come here, they come from India. It's a hardworking immigrant culture. It's generally, aimed at high achievement and high work ethic. And so, when they're expecting an A, they're expecting an A. It's just an expectation, and anything below that is not good. In fact, I literally caught myself yesterday saying the same thing to my middle daughter, and they were all screaming at me for saying something so unfair. But I guess it's deep in our DNA to just that you're there to learn, and you're going to learn hard. So it's definitely part of the culture, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because part of the thing the book talks about the inner city kids, the low-income inner city kids, is they have the exact opposite message being sent to them when they walk out of the classroom. So when they walk out of their schools, they're getting a kind of a message that you can't achieve anything. We don't believe in you. There's no place for you. These are all the things that are whispered to them through the culture at their homes and their neighborhoods. And you see it actually in an amazing thing when you look at the research. If you had an inner city second grader, let's say, for example, and they just graduated their second grade in June, and then you had a white suburban kid who graduated in June, and let's just say for the argument that they're at the exact same level when they graduate in June, when they return in September, when they start school in September, the inner city low-income kid has lost 3 months of learning, and the white suburban kid has gained 1 month of learning. So they're 4 months apart in September, and they don't even look like the same species of student at that point. And you can imagine what their teachers are doing, their third-grade teachers, what the difficulties are versus the advantages on the other side. And that gap just keeps on going and going and going forever. And what that's attributable to is the thing we just spoke of, the difference in the culture, right? So my culture says, why aren't you studying? Why aren't you reading? Why aren't you studying? Why aren't you reading, right? In that kind of typical tiger Asian mom kind of way. And then they're getting a different message, right? They're not getting the stimulation, they're not getting the motivation, they're not getting the vocabulary. There's like a 2 million word difference between the home of a low income kid and like a white suburban kid's home life. They're just saying more words and they're experiencing more things. These are real facts, and it's that summer slide and the longer day, the short days of school that actually attribute to keeping the gap going. And so one of the things in the book the research finds is that you can't close this gap unless you have time in the summer and you have longer days with those inner city kids. And they do close the gap. And what's an amazing thing that I found, we actually invest in one. We support a guy in Philadelphia. We live in Philly, and who has a summer program for 5 weeks with these inner city kids. He has about 800 kids in the public school system in Philadelphia, which is a really difficult school system in the country. It's actually not doing very well. And those 800 kids have a 3-month gain in the 5 weeks that they're with him. Now, so you're hearing me right. Compared to their classmates that aren't in that program, they are 6 months ahead when they come back in September. 1/2 a year they're ahead when they come back in September. And yes, if you're calculating right, they're 2 months ahead of their white suburban counterparts. So there's a gap the other way. So this is very, very closable. And it's amazing to see. We just need to change what their expectations are, what their work ethic is, the stimulation they're getting, the opportunities that they're given.
M. Night Shyamalan is on with us. His book is called I Got Schooled. Before I let you go, let's talk about movies quickly, since we do have you on.
Sure.
This is not one of your movies, but I just happened to see this. I know that you had wanted to perhaps do Life of Pi.
Oh, yeah.
And I just saw that movie over the weekend. You wanted to do it, I think, about 10 years ago. Technology may not have been able to even sort of do it at least the way that it was done with the movie that just came out last year. What did you think of it, and how did it compare to the vision that you would have done with that movie?
It's fascinating you bring up that movie because it's one of my favorite books. And back when I first found it and it first came out, I was gonna make a very dark version of that movie, a very kind of suspenseful, very twisted kind of, because the book is very dark. And it's fascinating to see how two people, and by the way, Ang Lee is like one of my heroes, the guy who actually directed it. He's literally one of my heroes. And he invented it and reinvented it in such a beautiful kind of fantasy way. It's funny because I have all the notes still in my drawer, and to see how two people would interpret a single piece of art is it's fascinating to see. If you saw the one in my head, you would think it wasn't even from the same book.
If there was a project that you could do, I'm sure you probably have film projects in the works right now, but if there was one thing that you could somehow magically have all the pieces fall together, whether it be a book or a story or whatever the case may be, you had the budget that you needed, what would you do if you could have everything just fall into place?
Mike, I've been really lucky because I write my screenplays, and in my heart, I've kind of come to the realization that I want to make smaller movies, more quirkier, smaller movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, luckily, what I get when I hang up the phone, I'm going to go write, and I'm going to write this little movie that I'm going to do next. And it's the budgets should be, and for me, I've come to the realization that the budgets should be at the level that I'm allowed to do the most innovative and original version of the story. So it doesn't really fit on a shelf. That's always the stories that come in my head. They don't really fit in a genre, and I want to make sure that I'm allowed to do that, to do something that doesn't really fit. And so I'm hopefully gonna do a lot of smaller movies in the future.
Is it hard to get motivated? Like I come to a job, I have the set time that I work.
Right.
You sort of, you're doing interviews, and then you say, all right, I'm going to start working. I'm kind of a procrastinator. I'd start watching TV. I go, oh, that screenplay has to get written, but hey, football's on. Is it ever hard to get motivated to work? Do you just sit there for a few months and go,
It's funny. It is very hard to write for a living. It's just a scary thing to go in a room by yourself and look at that screen or the blank page. You're always wrestling with your personal demons. And when I wrote this education book, I didn't actually have that, which was really interesting because it was something for kids, and it was something that I felt was important in terms of the information needed to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was writing on planes, and I was writing late at night and in between movies. I was writing this book over the last 4 years, and it was a different feeling than going to an empty page and evoking characters out of nothing, which is a kind of almost like pulling something out of yourself that's, if you're doing it correctly, is very, very revealing and vulnerable. And it's hard. Like, now you just said that, I had a little pang. I'm like, oh, my God, I got to go up to my office and sit. And, there's this little thing that, and one line will make you feel like you're connected to everything, and one line will make you feel like you're completely alone, and you can't feel anything, like you're numb. And so, if I go upstairs and I can't figure out that line, I can't figure out what that character says and why does it feel artificial, why isn't it real, the whole day is shot.
Yeah. Last question before I let you go. M. Night Shyamalan has a new book. It's called I Got Schooled. It made me think of this question because I know you did Signs with Mel Gibson, and we know what happened to him, sort of how he was, I guess, ostracized in Hollywood after some of his outbursts and whatnot. And so this question isn't necessarily about Mel Gibson, but you've made a lot of movies. A lot of actors and stars have been in your movies. Is there any, and you don't have to say who, I'm just wondering if there are any actors or stars that you've worked with that you just absolutely would not work with again because they were a pain in the ass, or they were whatever the case may be. If there's anyone you wouldn't work with, and why?
Well, you know what it is. I've been super lucky. The answer to that is there is probably a yes to that answer, and I wouldn't speak out of turn, obviously. But the real answer to that, and honestly, I know a publicist would tell me to say this, but this is the truth, because they're all been things that I've written, and they've mostly been small thrillers that have been coming from me, and I always dovetail something about my life in there, whether it's, like you mentioned, Mel saying like the birth stories of my kids in Signs. The movies are really, really about me, and when I talk to the actors, they get that. They get the sacredness of what we're doing, and they come to the table. I shoot really fast, and I put a lot of love into it, and they know I'm making it very personal, and they're usually extremely in a place of light, and are we get very close. And so I have a very specific experience with these guys. Again, 98% of my experience has been one of, I see the best of everybody, and they bring out the best in me. And it's the director-actor relationship is when it's working is a very intimate and close one.
Have you ever made a movie, and because you say it's so intimate, and you write these movies, I'm sure you are involved every step of the way, in the production, the editing of I'm sure you have your hands in literally everything when it comes to these movies. Some of your movies have not done well at the box office. No one bats 1,000. Has there ever been any of these films of yours that you got done with and you go, wow, that is not how I envisioned this turning out?
It's actually, when I make kind of more of the thrillers that come from my head completely, I never feel like that because they're so personal, and ultimately, they're like plays to me. I mean, I guess they're more theater than anything else, and they're so meaningful. And also, sometimes you come up with a quirky story. If I out of my head come up with a really quirky story about, let's say, two Amish people falling in love, that's going to be hard to sell and hard to understand. And let's say I decide that story, I want the Amish love story to end badly, right there, it's going to be a certain thing when it comes out, right? It. That doesn't mean you don't feel any less connected to that as the artist. So it's always the context of how it comes out, the expectations. Those are all so present in all the things that you talked about what you're calling the outcome financially or all that stuff, that it's not at all related to the relationship between why you created it and what you feel about the piece.
M. Night Shyamalan's book is called I Got Schooled, the unlikely story of how a moonlighting movie maker learned the 5 keys to closing America's education gap. It's available in stores right now. His website, I'll let you just Google him, and it will probably autocorrect, and that's easier than me spelling his name for you. I appreciate you coming on. Good luck with the book. And when's your next? I guess this is the last question. When do you have another film coming out?
The first thing you'll probably see from me coming up is a TV show on Fox that I shot the pilot for, which is called Wayward Pines, with Matt Dillon and Melissa Leo and Carla Gugino and a whole bunch of great actors, Juliette Lewis, and that'll come out in the summer on Fox. So that's the first thing you'll see, and then there'll probably be a movie at the beginning of the next year.
All right. Thank you. Good luck with the book, my man.
Oh, thanks for having me on to talk about the book and education in the inner city.
Thank you. M. Night Shyamalan.